before, during, and
kind of
after
see this
baby. When I came back from maternity
hyperextension,
leave, I wasn't
varus
sure if I'd
thrust.
be able to
We
like,
started
go back
with
to work
the cone or
full-time
cup
every
walking
day.
with her,
And
but
I'm
look when
just
she goes
happy
to
and relieved
put that weight
I
on.
came back to work.
Again, she has
and
trouble
years from now,
stabilizing the
when she sees me
quadriceps. So
moving,
again,
she
this might be a patient that I
asks
start
me,
this
"Why
activity
did you
certainly with
leave
crutches
every day?" I can say with
and
my head
brace
held
utilization
high,
to be able to
I
control that. This
was
was a
part of
non-op
something that
patient.
I
This actually was a
think is
patellofemoral patient that
My daughter
had
Leela drew a picture
significant
that we
gait
ended up using in the
deviations,
film.
and we were
It's
able
when
to
Riley
use
is drawing Bing
the
Bong
gait
on the
training
wall,
program
so
that
I
we
worked late at night, so I
used
could
for such a
actually
long
light
time
that shot. But
to
I think of it as
restore
an echo
pretty much
of
normal
what's
gait
important to me
patterning
about the film.
after about
You know,
6
I'm a
weeks, but
mother
it did
and
take
here's
us
my
about
daughter.
6 weeks
There's things
to
that are in the
reestablish
film that
sufficient
speak to
quadricep
that
control
relationship and to
and
growing up.
proprioceptive
And it gives
control
her a
for
connection
her.
to the film too, because I mean, she sees me
And
go
this
to
is her at
work
the
every
end
day, and
of the
you know, I
6
want her
weeks.
to
So at
also
this
be
point,
proud
I'll go ahead
of my work
and
in the film and
stop
to
there.
feel good about that.
That was great, Kim. A lot of great points you made. George's turn now.
One of
And
the
George will
reasons I
take over
really
as the
emotionally
moderator
connected to this
after
film
his
is
talk
because
for
I
the
was
next
a big
session.
girl. And so I really
Thank you,
loved
Dr.
the
Paulos.
idea of
And good
a
morning
movie
again.
that explored all different aspects of a girl.
All the
She
disclosures
can
have
be
been
angry,
identified
and she can be
previously, so I'm going to
disgusted,
skip
and
past
she can be
those.
scared, and she can be sad. And that by doing that, she was more authentic and more able to give.
I've had the
and
opportunity to
connect
talk
with
about
people.
some of the trendy things going on, such as BFR, such as neuroplasticity. Now, I guess it's probably old school time or retro
And Set
time.
Out is a
Is it really
story
time to go back
about
to looking at
learning to grow up
integrated
and learning
open
how to
kinetic
deal
chain
with
along
being
with
sad and knowing
the
that
closed
part
kinetic
of
chain
growing up,
rehabilitation?
part of being human is
Every
to
orthopedic
feel
surgeon
a
and
whole
every
bunch of
physical
emotions.
therapist has
When
their
we
own
started,
opinions about what are the
we
optimum
did a lot of
protocols.
research trying to break
And
down
it's certainly
how many
still a
emotions are there.
controversial
We did a
area.
ton of research
When
on
I was
ourselves
invited to
and
participate in
some
this
stuff
meeting and I
different.
was
We
asked
reached
to
out
actually
to
present this, do
scientists,
we need to go
neurologists,
back to the open kinetic chain because of the residual quadriceps deficits? My response was, well, some of us never left.
Right? And
In
at
other
first you'd be
words,
like, yeah, okay,
the
yeah, I'm
integrated
with you.
approach is really the best way to do this. So, we know about the ACL injuries, and if we look at the evolution of rehabilitation over the years,
then, I
back
don't
in
know,
the
it's
60s
like
and the
you've been out of
70s, we
school
used
for
to
too
use an
long 'cause your
integrated
brain
approach
starts
with
going,
open, closed, and
taking these
functional
little
rehab.
vacations.
Then in the 80s,
Early
it
on, we actually
became
had
open
tons of
kinetic
doctors running
chain,
around in headquarters, which was
isokinetic
so
era.
confusing.
Then in the
Any
90s,
fun
it
for us
became the
today,
closed
George?
kinetic chain because it was more
Is
functional.
that okay with you,
Then in
Arlie?
the 2000s, it was
So we just
functional
simplified it.
rehab because of the
Anger,
specificity.
fear,
And
sadness,
frankly, I'm glad I've been
disgust,
able to
and
hang around 50 years because now I hope we go
When we
back to
design
where we
characters,
should have
we
been
design
50
how they
years
feel.
ago and using
We started almost
a
with
combined
abstract
approach.
shapes or feelings.
Seems like the new cliche, every time you get a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, again,
What is
what
the
we've been
essence of
doing
the
for the
most
last
basic
20 to
thing?
25
I was a
years
kid
with
to
closed
draw
kinetic
it,
chain
how would I draw
exercises and
joy?
functional
And I thought of,
exercises
like,
hasn't
a
worked.
spark or
Here's
something
your
of joy. We
evidence.
thought of, like,
This is one of the
sparks,
best
elements, like
meta-analysis
champagne
studies that's
bubbles
been
and
reported by
celebrating.
Arden.
So joy, when
And
we
again,
design
we're only
her,
getting
it's about
55% of the
exuberance. Her arms
individuals
are all
back to
spread
the
out.
same pre-morbid
She's
level of
golden,
competitive
she's
activity.
glowing.
So what
So
we've been
it
doing
became
is
natural
not
to
working.
express her as
We
a
also
soul.
know, again, that only over
world.
half of those
Her face is
individuals can
always
return
wide
to a
open,
competitive
big
level.
smile.
So
When you
just
design
doing closed chain
anger,
exercises
very
and functional
rigid,
exercises is
immovable,
not the
and he's got
optimum
a
way
fiery
to get
temper,
muscle
he's
recruitment,
correct.
particularly
So
every speaker, I think, over
immediately
the
these images start
last
to
several
actually
days
coalesce
has talked
and
about
become
quadriceps
these
weaknesses.
shapes.
So
I always thought of fear as
the only
inability to
modifiable risk
So I
factor
drew
in
a
the
stick
Arden
box.
criteria
It's like
was
modified
again
into a far better
quadricep
design, but
strength.
that's ultimately
So
what
if we
stopped
have
me.
residual
Sadness
quadriceps
was kind of
deficit, what's the
around.
optimum ways
Saw
to
your
try to
character.
recruit that? So as I indicated, for the last 20 to 25 years, the emphasis has been on closed
There's
kinetic
a lot of
chain and
inspiration for
functional
sadness,
rehab,
but that could
and
be
frankly,
some of the earlier
it has
designs
failed.
may be a little bit too
So
melancholy.
again,
call it
I
calling
think
that
Einstein
designing.
said it
In
pretty
some
well.
ways, you
If we
kinda have
keep
to
doing the same
feel
thing
sadness,
over
I
and
would put
over and
on the
over, and we
headphones and
expect
try
different
sad
results,
music. I would just
that's at
kinda
least
get
one
to
definition
that
of
state.
insanity.
Even though our
So,
characters are
do we need to
specific
go back
emotions,
not
we
just to
realize
open
they're gonna
kinetic
need to act
chain,
out a
but
full
really
range
an
of emotions, not
integrated
just stick
approach?
to their
In your
one particular
handout, you
emotion.
have many,
Therefore,
many
sadness would
references,
have to
probably
have
about
happy
20
as
or
well.
30
And
references.
what would
I'm
that
not
look
going to
like?
have
What would
time in the
a sad plan
presentation
look like?
to
So we
describe,
realized it was gonna be
but
a lot
most
of
of those
blending.
talk about the
Discussed for a
integrated
long
approach.
time to
So we
figure
know
out,
there's movement
we needed more
alterations that
designs of that
occur
character
when
and I
somebody
put them
has
together.
quadriceps
A lot of that
deficits. deficits.
from issues
We
that
know that
we
those
wanted
quadriceps
discussed
deficits
or
can remain
discussed
upwards
it,
of 2 years.
which
So
seems
again,
like a
All I've heard for the last 50-some years is, oh, doing open kinetic chain exercises are going to stretch out the ACL, they're not functional, and are they really going to improve functional performance? Well, show me the evidence. When we look at this systematic review by Cruz in JBJS, arguably one of the better musculoskeletal journals, they looked at, is knee rehabilitation providing dynamic stability to the knee? So of course we need to do closed kinetic chain exercises because that's a functional movement. So they looked at 85 articles. 29 of those were level 1 or level 2 studies, and they used the consort inclusion criteria, which is very rigorous. Conclusions. Neuromuscular exercises should not be performed to the exclusion of strengthening and range of motion. Not saying don't use it, but use it as an integrated approach. So basically create a good foundation by working each link in the kinetic chain and then doing the functional exercises on top of it. Furthermore, neuromuscular exercises are not likely to be harmful, and this is a quote, harmful to patients, however their impact is small, making them unlikely to yield large improvements in outcomes or help patients return to sports any more quickly. And I know that's contrary to what a lot of people think, but again, all you have to do is look at the literature and it really tells us. So with all due respect, sorry to the functional fanatics, but doing functional exercises by themselves are not effective. It's very evident in the literature. So do we need to go back to the future retro? In other words, simple analogy, when you rehab a knee, you want a solid foundation. So you work each link in the kinematic chain, and then you work each muscle group, and then add the additional functional exercises on top of it. As we've already said, there are many studies that have shown quadriceps deficits following ACLs stay for a long time. Back over 30 years ago, we actually identified that quadriceps weaknesses remain for a long period of time. And not just peak torque, which everybody seems to look at, but more importantly, torque acceleration energy, or the ability to generate force quickly. That's power. That's the most important thing, is to generate power. Furthermore, we showed that hamstrings do return fairly quickly. All of these studies show quadriceps deficits following ACLs. So how can we, again, use an integrated approach to basically recruit those muscle groups as well? So what about the testing? Over and over again, a lot of people, we look at functional movement patterns, however you do that, but it's also important to test the quad muscles, however you do that again, whether it's through manual muscle testing, handheld dynamometry, isokinetics, or leg press, or functional testing, or whatever. But the question always comes up, is it really safe to do this type of testing? Well, my response is, when in doubt, don't do it. Depends on the graft type, time, fixation, status of the patellofemoral joint, and certainly KTs. If there's laxity, you need to be cautious. But nevertheless, if we look at some soft tissue healing graphs, they provide some insights relative to soft tissue healing when it's appropriate. If we do any testing, we may do isometrics, we may do multiple angle isometrics, short arcs, and again, it may be contraindicated early on, obviously, to do full range of motion testing. So short arc testing would also be very appropriate, either isometrically and or dynamically. But when we start getting so concerned about this strain on the ACL, Benyon, Johnson, and Fleming have done a series of several articles where they actually sewed a DVRT into the ACL and had the subjects perform a variety of different exercises. So they sewed the DVRT into the ACL. They had them perform a variety of things, such as illustrated there. But again, Fleming actually took it one step further and did a whole variety of functional exercises as well. Not going to go through all those exercises because they're published, but nevertheless, I just want to highlight a couple of areas. In other words, if
around
we look at
8,
the
9, the world
bottom,
was
doing a
open to her. She could
Lockman's
do
test actually
anything,
creates a
interest in
3.7
everything.
strain to
And
the
then
ACL.
she started getting a
Squats,
little older, and I see her
3.6%
in the
strain
back
to
of
the
the car, looking
ACL.
at the head on the
Active,
window.
flexion to
There's a lot
extension,
of signs,
2.8,
there's a lot of
unloaded.
drama, and I'm like,
Quad
where did this come
hamstring
from?
co-contraction
What's going
at
on in her
15,
head, you know?
2.8.
Kids grow up and change, and so.
So
this was an
again,
attempt to
we
sort of
look
capture that
at
and
the
dramatize that
strains
from
on
the
the
inside.
ACL and we
whatever
look at
reason, I
the
get this
ACL
concept
safe
of
zone,
instead of the
it's
brain,
certainly
what
appropriate
about the mind?
to limit
What if
those
you could do
exercises
emotions
within that
or
range of
characters
motion.
in the story?
Furthermore, if we
From
had
the very early concept, the
isometric
first
exercises
pitch,
at terminal
wanted the main
extension on the
character to
bottom,
be
that's where
essentially
you
joy.
need
I
to
think I called it
avoid,
optimism.
obviously,
We
during
always
the early
want to
stages.
answer the same
However,
questions, right?
if we look at flexion to extension with a 45 Newton boot, it's only 3.8% strain to the ACL. And then look at squatting, it's actually more. So everybody says closed chain exercises are safer, open chain exercises aren't. The literature doesn't support that using DVRTs directly sewed into the ACL. Now, we
just knew that she
published
kinda
an entire
represented
book on
childhood to
closed
Riley.
kinetic chain, and I
We thought
strongly
maybe
believe in
the
it.
key to
But
her
again,
is
it's not the
that
only
she's
way
not
to
in it
do
for
the
herself.
things.
She's in it
So
for
with
the
closed
kid.
chain
She wants
testing,
her kid to be
frankly,
happy, so
if
it's
we
all
have
about Riley.
deficits,
We tried that from
we
the very
still
beginning,
don't know
but
where
even
the
there,
deficits are.
it
We're
just
not
became
sure
sort
what
of
we
one
need to
note,
address in rehab.
kind of
This is one
monotonous
of the
and
ways
not
that we
believable.
address
So
closed
said, all right,
kinetic
well,
chain
what if
testing.
there's a twist on
Most
that?
of you
What if
aren't
we
familiar
make
with this.
her
This is called a
so
linea. And
fervent
watch
in
the
her,
individual's body.
passion?
You'll see
She's
that
actually sort of
herky-jerky
nasty
motion.
to other
The
people.
reason he pushes out concentrically and the
Right.
machine actually
Creep.
pushes him back eccentrically.
Whoa,
So it's a way to
nice.
test
It
tandem,
used to be that
concentric,
everything was just
eccentric.
joy,
Then we can do
she
bilateral,
travels down
reciprocal,
the but decided that
concentric.
you have to give her
So in the upper left-hand
some
corner, you can actually
against
see we
it.
can
She's
document
gonna
the
be
closed
talking to
kinetic
herself.
chain forces that are being
Anything
created in a
that she's
reciprocal
playing
manner,
in
like
opposition
walking
to is
and or
actually gonna
running.
help define who she
And then
is.
again, we
So
can
we
make it
tried a bunch of
functional.
different
So that's the
characters.
same
Initially,
device,
she
and we
was
just flip
paired
it up.
with Bud.
So again, we can
Bud was
actually
basically
objectively
sadness,
quantify
joy, then
closed
there
kinetic
was the
chain
hyper
testing
speedy person
of the
running
lower
circles around
extremity.
this big
But if
cloud
there's a
of the eye.
deficit,
But
again,
as it played out,
where's
that
the
was much more
deficit?
difficult than
So
we
we
thought.
have to also
trying to
look at the
enjoy with fear.
isolated testing in addition to the closed kinetic chain testing to identify where the problems are.
That didn't work.
So again, the
Because we
reason we need to
recognized
test
early
each
on
link
that
in the
this was
kinematic
largely
chain
about growing up.
is to check for
We
muscles
paired her
proximal
with an
distal. We've
imaginary
already
friend,
talked about the
Bing
Nicholas's
Bong.
article,
know how we can catch
TLS.
up to your memory.
Talked about deficits distant from the actual site, compensatory changes,
fairly straightforward
masking
at the
of
beginning of a project
deficits,
to say, okay,
and then
here's my theme.
do
But
we
it's another
really
thing to
know
really
we're
put it
targeting
across.
the area
And
that
so
we need
sometimes
to
I think
address?
we've been right on the
It's
theme,
well
but the wrong way
documented
we've
in the knee.
executed it.
This
When you
particular
get
study
in
by
there, it has
Ernst,
a way of
they
kind
did
of
a sergeant vertical
There's
jump
been this
using a
constant
vertex.
wrestling match with how
Eight
much
post
we
ACL
showed
patients,
Riley how
they
high
had
the stakes for her.
symmetry with bilateral
Sort of early on, we
comparison.
put the idea
However,
that,
then when they did
usually
isokinetic
movies,
testing to
the
isolate
higher
the
the
quads,
stakes, the better.
every
Well, to
patient
emotions
had
in a
quad
little girl,
deficits.
it's
Well,
very
wait a
different
minute,
perception of
how can they
stakes.
do a
We had an
functional
idea where
test and
Riley
still have
basically
quad
the whole
deficits?
movie
Well, it's
was about
obvious,
whether
muscles
she was gonna buy
proximal,
back
distal were
one
compensating for the
chips.
weak link. So again, we need to do open kinetic
lot
chain
of
testing
stuff
in
that just
addition
didn't go
to.
with, 'cause it's
The
just
bottom, it just simply shows an
remember their first
anti-shear
version
pad.
of it,
So in other words,
Riley
when you
was knocked
extend,
out.
there's a
We used to have
cantilever
a story for
effect, so
Riley
it
where
pushes
it
the
was
tibia
about
posteriorly,
her wanting
so it's not
to
going to
be
allow
part
an
of a
anterior
turkey
shear
patch.
to the tibia. All right, so with all that,
We're
again, we need to do
so
some type
almost
of open kinetic chain
unnervingly
testing. We've
open
talked about this for a long
to
time.
things.
And as I've said, power is really the key.
We go,
Rate
"Oh, no,
of
no,
force
you've done all this
development.
artwork,
It's
I
not
don't
just
wanna,
about
you know,
peak torque, but it's how
that's a good-
quickly
that's
we
a
can
good call."
develop the force, because that's the real key. Several studies
It's not just
also show
arbitrary
with
to predict
patients
these
following
changes.
ACLs
It's
that the
because
rate of
we're
force
trying to
development
find the world, we're
persists
trying to
upwards of
define the
even a
reality
year.
of this space.
So,
Based on the
again,
needs of the story.
we
So
need
it
to
always
do
comes
an
back to
integrated
the
approach.
main
Oh,
character's
doing
body.
open kinetic
After
chain is not
designing her, putting her
functional.
in sequences,
Well,
put her through
look
the
at all those
entire
studies.
breadth
All
of the
those studies
plot,
do
the
show
elements of the
that
story,
if you do
and
open
you
kinetic
find out the
chain
challenges.
testing, that it
We
does
brought joy
correlate
to
with
some
other
good
functional
places.
tests.
But as she pulled
As
her
I
life
said, you
back
have a lot of
together
studies
from
in your
pits of
handout. I'm not
despair
going to have time to go
and raced
through,
back
but
up
several
to
of the studies
headquarters
have
to
shown
prepare
that
things.
the integrated
We
approach
weren't
is
sure what exactly
optimum.
she was trying
trying
We
to
just
do.
published
We
this
have
in
no
the
idea what we're
Orthopedic
doing.
Knowledge online journal
At
by
that
the
point, I
Academy,
realized this film's
and
A lot
talked
of times
about
what I'll do is
rehabilitation
when I
concepts
feel
following
overwhelmed, I just
ACLs.
go walk.
That was just published this year. And again,
Hi,
it just
Pete
simply
here.
uses the integrated
I'm out
approach
walking in the
for
woods because I'm
rehabilitation.
stressed. I started thinking, all right.
What
if I
about the
lost it?
evolution? We've already
What
described
would
that
means-
concept. So as we look at some of the changing dynamics, we've all discussed the idea of the biopsychosocial, kinesiophobia, et cetera.
So I realize I
And
have
then
some
when we
flash
look at muscle activation,
emotions.
how do we really start an
Key
exercise program?
By
It's
that,
really
I mean
with muscle activation, motor
people that
control,
you
motor
feel the
learning
most deeply
first, then
connected
muscle strength,
with
power and endurance,
are the people
then
that, yes, you've had
neuromuscular
good times
dynamic
with,
stability,
people that
and
really
lastly,
mean
functional
something
specificity.
are those
And
that
if we
I've
look
tried
at motor learning principles,
pissed
and
off
we look
at,
specifically at skill
experience fear
reacquisition, which is
with,
what we're doing
it's
with every
all,
patient, in the
aspects
acute
of
and subacute
emotions
phases, it
that
really recommends that we
bond us
do
together.
So that gives me
isolated
this idea.
training to work each link in the
Maybe
kinematic chain,
joy,
and then in the terminal
much as we all
phases,
want it in our
put it
lives,
all
it's not
together
the
and
answer.
progress into the
answer
multiplanar
is
functional
exercise.
movement patterns.
And it was that
So,
sort of
again,
realization,
we need
which
to
felt
do
like
an
epiphany at the
integrated
time, but it was
approach.
actually where we started.
Even in this study, patients who participated in integrated approaches, including the open kinetic chain, subjectively felt that it was more effective. And again, as we all know, patient-reported outcomes are becoming more and more important.
We've got
So,
a new writer,
with that,
we've
again,
written
the
entire
MOON
thing.
group, the
Reworded it all.
Multi-Center Orthopedic
The most
Outcomes Network,
important
they
thing,
recommend
and for all of us,
that
was
open kinetic chain
emotional story
exercises
telling,
after an
why are we
ACL
doing
can
them
begin
together, and
at
what
6
can we learn
weeks.
from sadness?
And it frankly
Pain, story about
improves
joy,
quadricep
being
strength,
stuck with
and it
sadness,
does
which
not
is not
compromise
understandable
the
beginning.
ligament.
So
So in
you
other words, by doing
understand why we
serial
need to do
KTs,
this.
you're not
Yes,
going to
Joy.
compromise the ligament.
It's for your
And then
own.
finally, what about outcome studies?
Riley.
I'm only going to show
But
you
as
a
she
couple.
learns what
As I
sadness
said, I
brings
think
to
you
the
have
table,
about 10 or
in the end,
15 in your handout.
she realizes
But,
that sadness is
and again,
crucial.
most of those are level 1 or level 2 studies. I'm going to just highlight this one. A couple
We
of other
had solved
speakers over the
certain
weekend
things,
have also
and
used
people
this
felt
study,
like this
and this was a
story
classic.
is much more
Because what they
solid and I
did
get
is
where
they
you're going,
looked at
but I'm not
closed
on board
kinetic
because I still
chain
don't like your main
only rehabilitation
difficult because
versus
the fault
the
of your
integrated approach
character is to
using
be
open
happy.
and closed
I think
kinetic
what you
chain
connect to in
exercises
character
with
is they're
respect to
vulnerable.
getting people back
And to be
following an
incessantly
ACL
happy
injury.
is not
And
really
it was a
believing your own
prospective
ability.
matched follow-up
years
study.
we've been crafting
Now, it was
joy
probably an
to the best of
underpowered
our
study. I
abilities,
didn't see
but
their power analysis,
can't
but they had
seem to
44
seal the
patients.
deal and
One
make
group
this
did, again, only
character
closed
just
kinetic
come
chain.
on the
The
screen.
other group did the
That
integrated approach. They had a
next
2.5-year
step
follow-up.
happens when
Bottom line,
you find
results.
the right
No
form.
differences in the KTs.
I
So
think
the,
I really
the
understood
integrated
very
approach using
quickly as a
open
couple.
kinetic chain did not stretch out the graph. The integrated approach had statistically significant increases in the quadriceps torque. You work the muscle individually, it's going to help it. No differences in hamstrings. But really the most important finding is one, that the integrated approach, they had an increased number of individuals being able to return back at the same premorbid level. Secondly, they returned back 2 months earlier, which is half of a season many times in some sports. Conclusions, again, using the open kinetic chain integrated approach, statistically significant improvements in the quadriceps without reducing the stability, faster return, 2 months earlier, same premorbid level. And again, there's many other studies in your handout. This is just one of the others by Wright, a prospective study. And as I said, you have about 18 to 20 additional ones in your handout that we just don't have time to go through. So, in summary, we've talked about the importance of looking at an integrated approach as we start to look at why is there such residual deficits in many of these patients following ACLs. So therefore, we need to go back to the old school stuff sometimes, perhaps, and use the integrated approach. So, as you can see, these are the results of my patients. Tim didn't pay any attention. Mike didn't pay any attention. So if they would have, they'd have better results. So work each link in the kinematic chain, then integrate your neuromuscular reactive stability and your functional specificity into the program. So as I've said, for the last 52 years, it needs to be an integrated approach for both testing as well as rehabilitation. Thank you for your kind attention.
We're going to take just a few minutes, and George, I'm going to turn the program back to you here in about 3.5 minutes or 4 minutes. So first, I'm take the opportunity to just thank a few people, and first I'm going to thank the audience. Thank you all very much for coming. I had such a pleasure, and so many of you came up to me, and some said, this is my 5th course. Someone said, I go to this course every other year. What a delight. We appreciate that tremendous support, and this is actually a very expensive course. It's at a great resort. Many of you bring your families, and so please keep that that support, and please tell other people. We really do appreciate that. And I am so appreciative of the exhibitors, and they really assist us also with this type of a course. So now we're going to have the drawing, and if you can put the book up, the textbook, if you have that picture. And so Cassie, and I'm actually tricked her, I get to